All right, I think we have given enough time. We can begin. So I'd like to start by welcoming everyone to today's session organized by Vodafone Africa. This will be the 10th installment of the Metadata for Machines workshop. My name is Charles Kahiro. I'm the Creative Director at Readable Works Africa. And today's session, I guess, is moderated by 3 individuals. So it'll be myself, Francisca, and also Eric via a recorded video. So he has done a recording that will cover the content for today, where we'll be going into more or less the metadata structure and the different components when organized in an FDP. So everywhere from the repository layer down to the distribution. And in a very easy format, which he has put together, he will highlight the questions that we need to answer for those sections. And then eventually we will share a link to the document, which I believe some of us already have, but in case we have misplaced it, we will share it, and then we can have a discussion on it after we are done with the video. So for the duration of the video, please let's just have our mics muted to prevent interruptions. And then once it's done, we can open up if we have any questions or comments on the content that we will have seen. If you do have any questions while the video is going on, just drop them in the chat box, and we will see how to address them afterwards. So Francisca will now play the video for you guys, and then we will talk afterwards.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. Can you hear me, please?
Yes.
I was wondering, for the benefit of those who like to work while they listen, like some people want to see this as a demo session. Is it okay if I share the URL in the chat box now so that they can follow even as the video is being played?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, so
yeah.
I'll just go back to and find chat. Okay, so I'll have to get that from copy link and post for everyone. I wish I had the short form of the URL. Let me see if I can. That's just 1 minute. I will provided the short form, so for this, okay. All right. Couldn't get that, but this is fine. Yes. They provided that in the email. Okay. Yeah. So I can go back to the sharing.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Metadata for Machine Workshop number 10. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person today. I am trying to struggle with a busy schedule, and I wasn't sure I was going to make it for the 2 o'clock appointment. So just to be on the safe side, I thought I would go ahead and record this video. The goal today in the Metadata for Machine Workshop is very practical, and it's addressing the configuration of the fair data point. And I don't think it will take very long to take you through basic steps here. And at the end, what we will do is set up a homework assignment so that by next week, we can begin to get, I think, a much more detailed overview of how it is we want to configure the fair data points in Vodafone Africa. And we can begin, I think, an iterative process whereby we can get a better and better convergence or consensus on how it is we want to configure these fair data points individually and also as a group. So just to start off with a familiar picture of a fair data point operating in the Vote on Africa context, we have a hospital and a record-keeping process. We try to get some of the patient medical data into this electronic case report form. This is in a machine actionable format and is available for analytics in that way. The fair data point is the metadata that announces the existence of these case report forms. And that metadata is also in a machine actionable format. So we can do analytics both at the metadata level and with proper authorization and authentication, we could even imagine doing analytics at the electronic case report form level. If we think about the fair data point itself, there's really basically two phases to getting this process going. In phase one, which I think most of us are still in at the moment, it's this installation phase. So getting this server application up and running on a server, having it call home and in production mode. But once that is accomplished, we then face a challenge to figure out how to configure this otherwise generic and empty fair data point so that it reflects the Vote on Africa consensus and that it reflects the kind of information that's relevant for your local installation. If you were to log in to your up and running fair data point under the admin account, you would have edit access, shown here by the red circle, in order to be able to access and edit the metadata records that are already built into the fair data point as part of the core metadata structure. That structure is hierarchical, and we've mentioned this before, but at the highest level, there's the fair data point itself. But a fair data point contains one or many catalogs, and a catalog contains one or many data sets, and a data set contains one or many what we call distributions. The fair data point, I think we have a growing consensus that we want the fair data point to be, in a sense, locally owned or grounded in a particular data acquisition organization like a hospital or a clinic. Within these fair data points, there will be catalogs. And for example, one catalog could be for these electronic. There could be other catalogs for it's asking for file formats and other technical descriptions of the digital data itself. And so certainly we have our case report forms in the semantically enabled RDF format. So I think in most cases we will be linking to our RDF distribution, although we could just as well link to a text distribution or an XML distribution, etc. Okay. And these fields, by the way, should pop up when the fair data point is up and running. So what I'd like to do is just kind of take you through the basic core metadata records that are being requested at each level, and just kind of getting a feeling for what's being asked. And then between this week and next, it would be great if you could try to complete, or let's say create answers for, complete this these metadata records as best you can, and I'll explain that at the end. But if we look at the fair data point at the highest level, there's 9 metadata records or components that we need to consider. There's title and description, and these are pretty much what they say. These are human readable text descriptions that would allow a human being to understand what it is they're looking at when they come to the fair data point. So this is a title like the vote on fair data point or the KIU fair data point, etc. There's a description. So this fair data point contains metadata of data sets and other artifacts related to COVID-19 at this hospital, for example. So it's pretty straightforward, but we need answers there. Publisher, however, is a much more critical metadata record that needs real conversation here. The publisher is, as we've mentioned before, essentially the owner of this fair data point. They're the ones who accept the responsibility for it and the liabilities for it. So this is a pretty serious decision here. Who do we list as an organization? And do we actually have the official status of the organization, the official buy-in of the organization when we launch this fair data point? It will become an official document of that organization. So these things need to be considered. The version is pretty straightforward. I think we all begin with version 1.0. Language, in this case, refers to the human language that's being used in the fair data point. And we're giving an example of how to answer this question. The ISO standards system gives, for example, these links to the English language or to the French language, and these may be used here to designate at the fair data point which language is by and large represented at the fair data point. There's other ways of doing this, but this is one example of how to do it. And the same with licensing. We need to decide on how the licenses operate at the fair data point for the data assets that we will maintain here. And here's a link to some example licensing options that are available. Again, there's many options here, but this is something that you can do a search on yourself and look for digital licensing possibilities, but it's something we can talk about in future installments of the Metadata for Machine Workshop. The fair data point has a start date and an updated, when was this fair data point last updated designation? And these are pretty straightforward. And then there's also a reference to the country in which this fair data point is operating, or at least to which the organization who runs it is operating. And there's, again, possibilities for country codes that can be brought in so that the machine can understand exactly which country is responsible. If we go one layer down to the catalog itself, you see that essentially everything that's being asked is pretty familiar. It's what we've answered already up above. And I think in our case, the answers are pretty much the same as what we answered above. But the fair data point gives you the flexibility that some catalogs could in fact reflect different values here. So they could be in different languages, they could be owned by different organizations, etc. If we move to the third level, the data set level, then again, we see familiar metadata records here, but the last four, 9, 10, 11, and 12, are asking for something new. In category 9, it's asking for keywords. These are pretty much our straightforward idea of a keyword. These are just terms that hint for the human user about what this data is about and how it relates to other things. This is useful information for conducting searches and looking for relevant information that might be located on fair data points. So it's nice to have a rich, long list of terminology here that can help people to relate better to the data sets that we have. But again, this is for the human user, and that's in contrast to number 10 here, the themes, which are essentially keywords for the computer or keywords for the machine. And in this case, then, what we're asking for are URLs to resources on the internet that are related to these data sets. So for example, if we're talking about case report forms, we might want to link to the WHO and to the WHO sources of the forms that we're using here in this project. In section 11 here, there's a contact point, and this is just a reference to a person or to a contact if you want to get more information about the data set. And then there's the landing page. And this is just to say that there's if the landing page is not in fact this client that we're working on, this fair data point client, then we should specify what that page is. So for example, we may have the fair data point embedded in some other kind of web page. Okay, and then if we look at the last year, the distribution, again, you see familiar categories of metadata here that probably carry over from the higher levels. But there's other interesting things going on here. If I look at number 6, category 6, if the data set is itself a file, then we should supply here a URL that is the download link to that file. And that could very well be the case for our WHO case report form. On the other hand, if the data set is to be accessed through some other mechanism, like through what we call a Sparkle endpoint, so we can do a Sparkle query on that data, sort of in a pathway by which we could do analytics on this data set without actually having to download it, then we need a URL for that process as well. The media type and the format are trying to get at more and more this file format or this technical description of the representation of the data itself. And there's a vocabulary here that we're hinting towards. You might want to look, but in fact, most of us in this project are going to be referencing the RDF version of the case report form. We may include a textual version as well, or we could include a CVS version if we would like, but all of these then would have to be designated as different distributions of the same data set. And eventually we want to be able to list the distribution size in bytes, because if we begin to download a file or if we begin to access some data for query, it's very nice to know how large that data set is, because it could be anywhere from megabytes up to petabytes, and then that will very much adjust our expectations when we do our analysis. So these are the basic questions here. What I've done is I've gone back to the scoping exercise. This is a document that you all have access to. It's this link here. And it's a Google spreadsheet. There's a tab here called the FTP deployment teams. I'm sure you remember this. But if you go to that tab, what you see are each of the deployment teams for each of the fair data points that could, that are in the works right now trying to get booted up. So for each of these fair data points, what I've done now below is I've listed these questions, and it's 32 questions total, and I'm asking for your answers here. And I think we should assign responsibility to this task mainly to the country lead and to the main tech lead or tech coordinator, But it's certainly these questions are something that should be considered by everybody, and it may be, in fact, that answers such as the publisher may not be entirely technical, but really require contributions from the other data stewards here. So what we have is, I think, like 13 fair data points. We have 32 questions. So we have a matrix here of possible answers, 480 something possible answers. And if these answers can be supplied, say, by Friday or certainly by Monday of next week, then this is a starting point for a very interesting conversation we can have next week, which is, how do we come to an agreement on how we configure these fair data points so that we can legitimately call them vote on fair data points. That's a very nice outcome. But then also, when the fair data points are up and running, we will already have everything we need to know in order to configure them so we can really just kind of hit the ground running. So here's the homework assignment itself. If you can get to the scoping exercise, I would ask the country lead and tech leads to complete, if you can, by Thursday evening. Try to complete all 32 questions in the spreadsheet. If you do not understand any of these questions, that's okay. Just make an indication as such so that that's some point where we can come back and maybe explain further next week. Number 3 would be to give your answers in human readable language, preferably. But if you want to go ahead and use URLs or other code, that's fine too. But the primary objective here is just to make sure everybody understands what's being asked. And I think it's in any case nice to start with just a human readable understanding of an answer for these questions. And number 4, it's perfectly fine and even encouraged to collaborate, to coordinate with others in your team or even between teams as much as you like. What we want to do is get to a point where we're all collaborating and coming to an agreement on the same configuration ideas in each case. And we'll try to review these answers on Friday and formulate a discussion for the following week. So I hope this is seen as a very practical step forward. It's certainly something we can do now before all the fair data points are up and running. I think once we solve all the technical issues, then we have a really good start on our content as well for this. So I'll leave it at that for now. And I hope this works out well for you. And we will certainly see you next week. Okay, thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
All right, there you have it. I don't know whether there are any questions right off the bat that anyone has with regards to the presentation that has just been given, clarifications on the same. This would be your moment. So let me just try and do a summary of it in case anyone missed it. I don't know whether you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see it, Charles.
Yeah, it should have a page to the GitHub repository. Yeah.
Yeah, this is I think I have to stop my sharing then for you to share your screen. This is my own screen you're seeing. So, okay, yes, I can see your screen now.
Yes, so essentially the overview that Eric has given, we have had this discussion before. I think it was Metadata for Machines workshop number 5, I believe, where we were going into the fair data point metadata specifications. So I know from the Taking Stock webinar last week, one of the issues that was highlighted, or one of the things that was highlighted, was people would like to get into the actual practicality of developing the metadata and the tools required. And for that, you would need a schema to create your schema or your plan on what the metadata is going to look like before. And I believe Eric did take us through this metadata layered approach that the FDP has. Sorry. In terms in terms of the data or the metadata that the FDP is going to churn out. So what he has done is picked some of the main fields for these sections with regards to each layer. So we have the repository layer, which is the main layer for the fair data point. And then we have the catalog underneath, which would be a collection of data sets. Then we have the data set itself, or the metadata layer for the data set itself, as well as the distribution. Now, in here, we were looking at it from the design of the RDF itself, but what he has done right now is put together just a list of the questions for the main components for each of these metadata layers, so we can start thinking about what would those answers specifically be. So when we go into the fair data point metadata layer for the whole repository, as highlighted in the document that Francisca is going to share on our screen, or had already started sharing, but it's things around the title. For example, what exactly do you want the naming or nomenclature for your FDP to be, the version as well, the description for your fair data point etc, as articulated in the list of questions. So you do not have to go down to the details of putting all the links together for starters, but it does give us a good starting point in getting us to think about those things. We can just put the name in there. If, let's say, when it comes to publishing, you do not know who, or you do not have, let's say, a link to your organization's website or whatever, you can just put the name in there, and then we can have a discussion next week based on what the entries will be. So it's more or less a practical version of the discussion that we did have around these metadata layers and the structure of the metadata in the fair data point. I don't know whether Francisca can share her screen now with the questions outlined. So what he has done is just picked the main ones to get us started, and then we can fill them if we do have the answers, for example. So if we say right now for the repository metadata, the publisher is one of the hospitals, for example. If I'm to take based on what was filled in the previous scoping exercise, if I am to say, let's say the publisher for the Kampala fair data point will be the case hospital in Kampala, for example. Even though we do not have a link to that hospital or a URL that links to maybe a website or another repository or something around the same, you'll just put it in human readable text, and then we can engage in that discussion on Tuesday. I don't know whether it's clearer now. Or there are still any pending questions on the same? By all means, you can unmute your mics now. And yeah, if you do have a comment, a question, seeking clarification on the exercise, now is your chance.
In addition to
Or if you are
everything
completely lost, this is also a time to highlight it.
trying to highlight, yes. Just to add to everything you have said, Charles, the requirement is that the answers be provided in the spreadsheet by the country teams. And then we also encourage that there could be cooperation within the teams so that they can work together. Uganda team can work with in Kenya if they get stuck anywhere. Even though Eric had already given some examples in the scoping exercise, and the link that has been shared, everyone has access to us editing access. So, but it would be nice if the country coordinators and the TOT support for the countries will work together with all data stewards in the same country to answer all the questions. And like I said, if there are the ones that are not clear, you can always indicate that there so that on Friday, you will do the much you can to provide the answers, and this prepares us for the next week's webinar. For the Ethiopian team that is not here, I will personally get across to Getu and Wondimu and the other data stewards, Desta, Ephraim, and Tigis to also, I'll share the video with them and also let them know the requirement. If they need help, we can always assist them since we're not here to be part of today's presentation.
Charles, this is Bert here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
I have a question because I think that maybe for some of the users it could be slightly confusing that sometimes they have to put in, let's say, plain text, and sometimes they have to put in an URI. So maybe a kind of a guidance, I don't know, maybe by a color scheme or so or whatever, in terms of when do we expect text and when do we expect a URI. If you look at 5 language, for instance, we expect a URI. But if you look at 4 version, then we expect text. And then, you know, there are also some of the things that I thought could be both. So I think we should be very clear in terms of what do we expect.
I guess for starters, we will just go with human readable text to begin with. So if your, let's say, language here, what we would prefer is a URI, but if there's difficulty in deciding on which specific URI you want to find, whether it's via the ISO standards and it's a bit complicated to find either the ISO website and where the vocabularies for the different languages have been set up, it is easier to just set it up as English or French or Spanish or whatever the language will be. So now later we can highlight, okay, so if this is your language, this is where you will go. Afterwards, you will go to this site and you will pick this hyperlink which links to the English language or highlights that English language, and then we will put it in the specific cell. So it's more of, let's say, starting us off so we can see whether we have already even thought about those elements. And then now we can delve into the specificities going forward. The links that are supposed to be URIs will be added. For example, if we take the license, which would be a URI of the usage license, maybe we are not sure on which license or which URI to add. But you know, for your license, you want it to be Creative Commons license. So what you will do, you'll just write a Creative Commons license there, and then from next week, we will start now highlighting how we can gather all the URIs that link to those specific elements.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. So let's start with this with the human readable input first, and then we can always make the switch to the machine actionable one at a later stage.
Yes.
Yeah.
Clear.
So let's just do human readable text. That one should be easy enough for all of us. If there are sections that you don't understand, just reach out and then we will give you clarification on it. So our hope is that we can have all the questions answered, or at least a majority of them, for all the FDPs. And then from Tuesday, then we can engage in the discussion and highlighting, maybe you don't know where to find the URIs. These are some of the websites that you can access to get some of those links or key identifiers.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Very good.
Additional comments, clarifications as well. Or if I'm to ask a simple question, do we know what we need to do now? If we do, just type yes in the chat box so we can get some feedback from you. Or if you don't as well, you can just type, no, we are not yet clear on it, so we can clarify. Yes, I see Reginald saying, yes, it's clear. The questions will be useful. Maybe feedback from the other country teams. Yeah. All right, I can see the yeses coming in. Good stuff. So I think we are good and ready for it. I don't know whether we have any additional announcements, Francisca, on the same.
Yes, thank you, Charles. I've seen a lot of yes, yes, yes. I see not clear from Dr. Abdullahi. So I would like to welcome our new partners from Nigeria, the new member of the Modern Africa team from Nigeria, the Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida University, Nigeria, Niger State, represented here by the coordinator, Dr. Abdullahi Kawu. Yes, we're going to be having a separate meeting to bring you up to speed, just like you have asked in the chat box. So it shouldn't be a problem for you to catch on very, very soon. Yeah, these are things that we have done for almost 3 months now, so we can understand your feeling not so clear, but that's very nice. We're happy to have you here, and you're welcome to the Vodan Africa family. So from the chat box, as you can see, Charles, looks like everyone else, yes, everyone else, they have an understanding of what to do, but like Eric had pointed out, if there are problems, they should just indicate in the box. And then also in response to Beth's observation, I think I will go in here probably in a different colored pen. I'll also indicate for each of the questions where text is required. When we have agreed, yes, everyone should use human readable. For those who clearly understand everything to do, we'll just indicate, okay, textual or numbers or, and we meet our colleagues from Ethiopia, but I will definitely catch up with them separately much later. I'll talk to Getu and Wundimu and the other data stewards. So other than that, that's all from me. I would like to thank everyone for their participation at today's webinar and look forward to meeting again next week.
Great. We'll be looking to the country leads and the tech leads to facilitate this process and at least ensure that we have some of the fields or a majority of the fields filled out by Thursday, so we can take a look at them on Friday and over the weekend, so we can have a robust discussion on the next session. If you still have questions or comments, have them ready even after you fill the forms, and then we can address them on Tuesday as well, in case you had difficulties filling it and anything around that context. Given that comment, I guess it's a wrap, and we would like to thank everyone for taking the time to be here with us today. Some announcements before we sign off. I see there's one, which is a reminder to the country leads to give report updates to Fred. So be sure to do that, as well as the recorded version of this webinar and the recording from Eric will be available on the Vodafone Africa website. So in case you missed part of it, or you came in late and you would like to review it one more time, just be sure to check it out, and you will find the 2 recordings on there.
Charles?
Also be sure, sorry?
Sorry, Charles. Sorry,
Yeah.
before you finish, this is Miriam.
Yeah.
I just wanted to respond to the point by Fred, which you also announced on the reports by the country leads. And just to say that it looks like a very, very insightful and useful process, which actually will really help us to understand what is going well, where there are still things where we need to pay more attention or put on the agenda for the coming time. So it's quite an important process, and I'd like to support Fred in requesting that some attention is given to these reports, because we are actually going to use them. Thank you, Charles.
All right. Yeah, I guess I cannot add more on that. So yeah, hand in the reports. I guess they are necessary at this point in time, so that we know who's reached where on what. Following up on the recorded version of the webinar, as well as the video from Eric, and also we'll be meeting next week for the 11th installment of the Metadata for Machines workshop. So details and the timings and the login details will be shared on the various channels, on Slack and on the WhatsApp groups. I see someone highlighting the slides as well. They will be sent to everyone. So just be on the lookout for an email from Ivy to everyone on the same, and you'll be able to find the content. We really didn't have any slides, more or less, but it'll be more of the video presentation, which has all the details. So once again, thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, Charles.
All right.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you, everyone. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.